Do what your kind does best. Break it, and then make it whole again. Alright class, settle down and let me tell you a story. A lifetime ago, I used to read books to people online, and now that we're doing this, I thought might as well revive the idea. But this time, instead of reading smut to lonely women, why not books that I actually like? So for tonight, we're gonna read the epilogue and the first chapter of the life of Karl Franz, otherwise known as the Prince of Altdorf. And you guys are gonna have to forgive me since I executed this one during a heavy bout of insomnia, and I did my best to clean and edit the whole thing. As always, thank you for the likes and hit that subscribe button for Sigmar's blessing. Total War Warhammer 3 The Prince of Altdorf. Prologue. The old man cast Warpstone into the burning brazier. The flames immediately took on a green tinge, and vile, noxious smoke filled the chamber. The man's milky eyes wept tears of blood, but nevertheless he inhaled deeply. "Show me," he whispered. His shoulders and neck arched as the smoke billowed into his head, entering through nostrils and mouth, bombarding him with a vision. He saw the life of a sovereign, an ascension from prince to emperor. Within minutes, an entire future had been laid bare, with great events to secret meetings and even inner thoughts revealed. The visions clouded. The brazier burnt low. The man returned to the now, and not a moment too soon, for the witch hunters were close. He grabbed his staff, made to leave, and beckoned. The raven perched in the corner of the room. It had remained silent throughout the burning of the warpstone, and only now moved, fluttering to the man's shoulder in a flurry of feathers. Its beady eyes regarded the old man as if appraising, as if only it knew whether the vision was true. This is that vision. The Prince of Altdorf, a novella by Andy Hall. 2470, in the reckoning of the imperial calendar. The monster came at dusk. On cloven hooves they approached the inn of the Black Boar, snarling and braying, quiet at first, but then getting louder as the man's stink filled their flaring nostrils. Reich's captain Kurt Helborg knew there was something wrong even before the bray scream announced the beastman attack. "Reich's guard, weapons out!" he shouted as he shot upright, ascending his bow of stew skittering across the table. The other 15 men did likewise, vaulting from the trestle table where they had been eating moments before to grab their sword belts and scabbard. The familiar scrape of metal against hardened leather could be heard as the soldiers unleashed their steel. A few went for their armor, but most knew there wasn't enough time. The inn was under attack and the imperial family were in mortal danger. A few hours earlier, the emperor's retinue had come across the inn as they traveled a road that wended its way through the Drakwold. Daylight was fading, and Altdorf still 15 leagues to the north. The young captain had no choice but to order a reluctant stop. The Black Boar was a large coaching house, with an attached stable and a well-maintained yard surrounded by tall walls. The innkeeper had been beside himself to discover the Emperor Luitpold. His wife, daughter, and young son were staying the night. He loudly proclaimed that his own chambers were at his disposal, although this didn't quite solve the problem where 20 of were Helborg's best Reichsguard, plus numerous servants and serfs would stay. There were other logistical issues too, such as how the stables would cope with all the horses, and whether the courtyard could fit the gun wagons, carriages, and baggage trains that typically accompanied an imperial party on provincial tours. In the end, it mattered not, for a loud bray outside signaled the beastman's arrival. Even as Helborg grabbed his weapon, Gore leapt over the walls and into the courtyard on the hunt for man-flesh. A couple of stable lads were the first to die. Moments later, the wall at the front of the inn was pulverized as two minotaurs charged through. One immediately collapsed, the large blocks of dry stone having taken their toll on the creature's head. The other, however, powered through, running up to the inn and ripping off the front door. Fortunately for the men inside, its muscled frame prevented it from running amok, although the whole building shook as the creature repeatedly thrust its great shoulders into the lintel. The breach in the inn's wall, created by the minotaurs, was all the war herd needed to flood in. "You five," pointed Helborg. "Accompany the Emperor's family to the chambers upstairs. Block the doors, protect them with your life." The soldiers gave curt nods and immediately ran into the room opposite to where the Emperor and his loved ones had been dining. "Follow me," the captain shouted to the rest. On the outside of the inn, 5 Reichsguard had been patrolling the perimeter, while others ate in the common room. As the bray of the beastmen cut through the night, the on-duty soldiers had instinctively reached for their swords. 3 raced into the courtyard, but ready to face the 6 Gores that now stalked towards the side door of the inn. The remaining 2 Reichsguard ran to the front to face the Minotaur and the other bestial invaders. They lunged at the monster as it reached the inn. The soldiers sprang forward, stabbing the bull-headed beast deep in its haunch. The creature swept to its free arm around and sent the man flying. Inside the coaching house, the Reichsguard escort had collected the Emperor's family and were ushering them upstairs. The rotund innkeeper blocked the way. "I want you out," he shouted in a trembling voice at the Emperor. "Bringing this trouble here." A Reichsguard grabbed him by the arm and bodily flung him down the stairs. The remaining soldiers trampled on his prone form, briefly stopping to aid the Emperor's wife consort and her daughter over the inn's owner. Luitpold's wife glanced down in sorrow at the man, but then looked again at the baby son in her arms and her face hardened. She continued up the stairs. On the upper floor, servants ran and screamed in panic and were mercilessly pushed aside by the Reichsguard. At the end of the corridor was a heavy wooden door, past which were the innkeeper's chambers. Within were more wailing servants, but the Reichsguard paid them no heed as they escorted the Emperor and his loved ones inside, and then closed and barred the door behind them. Mere seconds after, windows were smashed downstairs and beastmen poured in. Helborg had no idea what happened to the men who had been patrolling outside. The truth was, he didn't have time to concern himself with them. He stood on the first step of the stairs, facing the front door, bellowing orders and striking at the cloven-footed monster as they reached him. He was flanked on either side by his men and only 2 of who were in armor. The Gores congregated on Helborg's position, clearly desperate to get up the stairs, but the Reichscaptain and his men fought with Sigmar's fury. Corpses littered the floor, clogging the hallway, making it difficult for more of their horned kin to attack. And yet, the beastmen were determined, and the Reichsguard began to fall. One man was gored in the arm and dragged, shouting, into the horned morass. With every Reichsguard death, Helborg knew he was closer to failing his sworn duty. As exhausted as he was, this made him furious. He struck out in anger, swinging his sword and cleaving a beastman in twain. Upstairs behind him, he heard the smash of windows, and knew the creatures must have scaled the walls. It would not be long before the beastman took his head and that of the Emperor. "Sigmar saved them," he uttered under his breath. Suddenly, he felt a rush of wind as something flew past his left ear, missing it by the width of his mustache. A black shaft embedded itself into a Gore he was facing, and another came whistling past to strike a gore in the eye. Suddenly, the stairwell was filled with arrows flying downwards behind Helborg, and all missing him to hit the beastman he was facing. Helborg knocked on the heavy wooden door. His hand was shaking and he quickly withdrew it. He didn't want the elf that stood next to him to see his shame. If the hooded Sylvan had noticed, he didn't say anything. "Yes," answered an uncertain voice within. Helborg recognized it immediately. "Gruber, let us in. There is someone to see the Emperor." The door was unbarred cautiously. Helborg strode in, closely followed by the elf. "Your Eminence, may I present our saviors?" Emperor Luitpold stood up straight, relief on his face mixed with caution and curiosity. "We are in your debt," he began. The wood elf gracefully but forcefully held up his hand to silence the Emperor. Helborg bristled, but the elf took no notice. "We care not for your gratitude," he said in a strange accent. The elf fixed his emerald eyes on the baby held by his mother. He walked over and the Reiksguard tensed. "I will not harm the child," said the elf. "He is far too important." Luitpold calmed his men with a gesture. He could see elves stood silently in the hallway beyond and knew that if the capricious creatures wanted them slain, there was nothing he could do. The dead beastmen strewn across the landing were more than enough evidence. The elf looked upon the baby snuggled into his mother's arm, blissfully unaware of the danger he had been in. "Harafoy Koran," whispered the elf and placed a finger lightly on the baby's forehead. "Do what your kind does best. Break it, and then make it whole again." Without a further glance at the Imperial family, the elf withdrew. His kindred quickly followed through the smashed upper windows, disappearing quickly as they had arrived. In their absence, the baby began to cry. "Hush, Karl Franz," soothed his mother. "It will be all right."